In the many years since Metroid and Castlevania found common ground, there's certainly been no shortage of inspirations and imitations. But who would have thought that in 2025, a Metroidvania would short-circuit nearly every online storefront? It's of course no surprise after Hollow Knight sold 15 million copies, but Silksong's success is still pretty amazing to witness. Let's be real for a second though. Not everyone vibes with the high difficulty and massive size of Team Cherry's masterpieces. And hey, maybe you've already played them and you want more. That's why I'm here to help with a curated list of 50 Metroidvanias on Steam that all kick a variable amount of ass. Even the flawed ones are pretty dang cool, and some of them have some really wild ideas. My name's Matt, and I've played thousands of games over the last decade, and I'm putting that staggeringly useless achievement to good use for you, the hungry gamer. I'll assume you've played the biggest games like Hollow Knight, Guacamelee, and the Ori series. I also have a strict definition on what makes a Metroidvania, which is the gating of locations behind movement abilities or tools that you acquire throughout your adventure. So if you're the same kind of genre snob that I am, you have a home here. Now let's get started with the one that started it all and the games it inspired. Despite the portmanteau, there's actually not a whole lot that Metroid and Castlevania share outside of the ability gating that Simon's Quest and Symphony of the Night had. Sure, there are interconnected maps, but even those are handled slightly differently. This means there's a lot of fans out there that hunger for a very specific type of game. Isolated, alone in a sci-fi world with various weapons to fight alien creatures. Luckily, there are plenty of Metroid-style games out there ready for you to explore. With Super Metroid randomizers being highly popular with streamers, I'm kinda surprised a robot named Fight never took off. It's essentially an indie game version of that very conceit. Every playthrough has a new map and progression route, and as you keep playing, more types of abilities and weapon upgrades get unlocked for future runs. You can only continue once from a save station, which makes them all the more important. The only real issue I have with the game is that the player sprite is a little too closely modeled after Samus Aran. I mean, come on. Shoulder spheres, visor, and arm blaster? Otherwise, this is Metroid and Binding of Isaac having a baby. If you played through Rogue Legacy or Dead Cells and wish they had more actual Metroidvania elements, a robot named Fight is the game you've been looking for. I'll admit, I have a little bit of a spur in my brain over the final boss of Axiom Verge because of its wild difficulty spike. But I also have to admit that Axiom Verge is pretty damn good. It's a gun-heavy Metroid-style adventure where you've been isekai'd away in a lab explosion to a weird alien world. There are cool glitch-based powers, as well as the usual health and ammo upgrades, but the weapons you collect are also each interesting in their own right, like this wham-wham gun or the bullet that explodes in all directions. The boss fights are just kinda except for that final hurdle, which is why I like to give a tiny enthusiastic shrug towards the sequel. I know it has a more divided reputation since it's more melee-focused, but I still think it's kinda cool, no pun intended. Bosses that free roam in the open world, and a little robot friend you send on adventures. It was a vibe I was very much into, but obviously the original is still the big star here. Before setting millions of brains on fire with the devious rule-based puzzler Baba Is You, developer Hempuli made a lo-fi Metroid classic 10 years ago with Environmental Station Alpha. Don't let its massive pixels deceive you. This is a full-fledged sci-fi search-action adventure with organic alien environments, crumbling one-way platforms, and tons of bosses. And for the secret hunters out there, there's lots of post-game stuff to seek out as well. There's a short-form style of this genre called the Microvania, and one of the best comes from the charmingly named Doinksoft. After an astronaut ship crashes and gets stuck, it's up to his brave little kitty to save the day, with the help of a mechanized combat suit, of course. Gatto Roboto distills the Metroid experience into a compact 3-hour game, shown in a 1-bit monochrome style that calls to mind the Daniel Remar classic Hero Core, and just to tap into that more, you do gain access to a sub that gives you some of that same omnidirectional exploration. Otherwise, you'll be running around in your suit, blasting creatures, finding a similarly suited mouse, and occasionally hopping out to navigate small passages. This cat doesn't need a morph ball, they need a yarn ball. Oh, come on, the toxoplasmosis in my brain tells me that joke was good. Now, I'd be remiss if I didn't include UFO 50, the game I obsessively explored last year. Metroid is definitely represented here in the form of Vanger, a quirky gravity-based platformer where you can flip between floors and ceilings at any time, and it gets away with that thanks to UFO's consistently responsive controls, allowing them to put all sorts of spikes and hazards in your way. Though if you die, you'll just start back at the beginning of the room until you run out of lives and have to reload a save. And the save points aren't that far apart, it's just a matter of memorizing where they are. See, one of the forced limitations of UFO 50 is a 2-button control scheme, and that means you can only access the map at save points. Is that annoying? Yup. But this is 80s console difficulty, another consistent element of the project. The other interesting aspect is the elemental cores, which you can apply to different parts of your body for different perks, like new weapon styles or the ability to explore high-temperature environments. Of course, Vanger isn't the only Metroidvania in the collection, but it's the most conventional. Golfaria is a weird mix of Zelda and golf that works way better than you would think, and Barbuta is a crude tribute to early 80s computer adventures. It's extremely stiff and difficult, but it's fun in a sorta La Mulana way. In contrast to Metroid, Symphony of the Night places its weight in RPG mechanics like experience points, shops, gear to equip, and melee weapons. And rather than have a world of various biomes, the game takes place in one large structure with a bunch of differently themed floors. Now, that isn't going to be the case for every game in this section, but I think you'll still agree that Castlevania was the main inspiration. You can't really kick off a Castlevania section without talking about Bloodstained, the first new game from Koji Igarashi since Order of Ecclesia. You play as Miriam, the subject of unholy experiments, who now has to stop the only other subject that managed to survive. Everything you want is here, from the twisted labyrinthine castle to enigmatic allies that help in various ways. As you defeat enemies, you'll gain unique magic powers that you can strengthen through crafting. And some of those enemies, oh boy, I can't even show the quote-unquote Kraken boss without getting demonetized. The aesthetic might not be to everyone's taste, though I think it works in its own unique way. And there's been a ton of post-release content added to the game, including a classic mode patterned after the original NES Castlevania games. There's even a second classic mode as paid DLC that imitates Simon's Quest. It has mixed reviews, but I have to appreciate the commitment and dedication. If all you care about is Symphony of the Night and you can't wait long enough for Bloodstained 2 to arrive, look at Chronicles of the Wolf, a pitch-perfect tribute to the Castlevania franchise by longtime fan game developer Megami Games. Chronicles doesn't even try to hide what it is, with a Belmont-looking protagonist, an Order of Ecclesia-style overworld and castle, lots of equipment to juggle, and otherworldly bosses to fight. It's even got some cheesy voice acting.
I bet that you will die!
What?
The controls are definitely stiffer than just about everything else on this list, but in a way that wouldn't feel out of place on the Super Nintendo, and there are multiple endings to discover, rewarding a thorough playthrough. At this point, Team Ladybug should be no stranger to Metroidvania fans, whether it's their record of Lodos War game or the recent Blade Chimera, but for me, my personal favorite will always be Touhou Luna Nights, which is weird because I don't really have any kind of personal connection to the Touhou franchise, but Ladybug really knocked it out of the park on this one. With its excellent map and its heavy use of time-based powers, who doesn't like activating Dio's stand and just absolutely annihilating enemies? It's the only reason anyone still plays Fear, certainly not for the jump scares. Did you know Team Ladybug also made fan game Metroidvanias for Shin Megami Tensei and Konosuba? This dev just really likes Symphony of the Night, and all power to them. I'm okay with taking some heat on the inclusion of soldiers despite its mixed rating on Steam, and that's because I unequivocally, unconditionally loved this game. Maybe it's because I played on normal difficulty, but I had no issue with that difficulty and I found the checkpoints pretty fairly spaced. The good news is that if you do like the core gameplay loop, there's a ton of this game to enjoy. You play as a soldier in an army unit betrayed by their kingdom, brought into the afterlife on the brink of death to help with their problems. Each dungeon could be an entire Metroidvania of its own, they're that huge, but I found them so satisfying to explore, to collect, to unlock shortcuts. Many long-form Metroidvanias wear me down by the end, but Soldiers was the rare outlier that I enjoyed all the way through, and shout out to having a full commitment to a 16-bit look and sound. Of course, there's no beating the classics, and if you've somehow never played the Igarashi Pantheon, well... Symphony of the Night still isn't on Steam, but Konami has released collections of all of the Game Boy Advance and DS games. The handheld games vary in quality, but they're all generally quite good, except maybe for Circle of the Moon, which is a bit more flawed. But look, I have special memories of that one playing it as a teenager. You do start to notice the sprite and asset reuse by the time you get to Portrait of Ruin, so certainly pace yourself, but if you have any fond memories of this era, these collections are a no-brainer. If you have any fond memories of Lament of Innocence, you're interesting. You're an interesting person. Now, besides Metroid and Castlevania, there are many Metroidvanias that either do their own thing or do a very, very specific thing. Why imitate one game when you can imitate your favorite games? For example, the Wonder Boy series has had an interesting journey. The NES game Adventure Island is actually a rework of the first Wonder Boy arcade game, and then the series eventually replaced arcade action with some more fantasy RPG trappings. While the Dragon's Trap is considered by many to be the best Wonder Boy game, I'm a bit more partial to Wonder Boy and Monster World for the Sega Genesis, but the best game in the series isn't even an official game. Monster Boy and the Cursed Kingdom was developed with the help of Wonder Boy's creator, and it definitely feels like the fully realized vision of what a Wonder Boy game could be in the modern era. You don't get the gorgeous aesthetic of the Dragon's Trap remake, but it's still full of vibrant environments and hand-drawn animation. It has a large, well-designed world, and the animal transformations, for the most part, are all put to good use. Plus, music by Yuzo Koshiro. Astroport is one of those developers that feels like they were born in the wrong era. All of their games have that spirit of the late 90s, when the Sega Saturn was the last gasp of 2D gaming, and Rocketron is another excellent arrow in their quiver. Really fun to say, too. Rocketron! It's a mix of run-and-gun Contra shooting and Blaster Master world design, with lots of cool weapons and a jetpack for fun maneuverability. It does do the transistor thing of forcing you to switch weapons a lot, because you lose access to one if you take too much damage, so keep that in mind. But it's astounding to me just how few people have played this developer's games. Rocketron in particular only has 57 reviews on Steam, even though it's just $6. Come on, gamers, stop gambling on horse girls and start playing extremely niche 2D action games. Okay, I see where I've gone wrong here. Redo is not one that a lot of people know, and maybe that's because of its tougher difficulty and slightly stiffer controls, but it does an incredible job of selling a life of desperate survival. You might be the last human on Earth, and pretty much every machine wants to kill you. The manga Blame is a definite inspiration, and though there's no Souls-like tag, you will claw and scrape your way through every encounter, relishing in each new checkpoint you find. This is a horror game, but its scares come through its game design and atmosphere rather than trying to be spooky or jump scare you. Redo is not going to be for everyone, but for those who vibe with it, I think they're really going to like it. You want a Metroidvania that costs only $1 and kicks ass? How about 2014's Rex Rocket, a love letter to Metroid and Mega Man from the developer of the love letter to Zelda, Blossom Tales. Your blaster can not only fire in all directions, but can help you to glide and even get a little bit extra out of your jump, with the later Charge Blast giving you even more of a lift. Right from the get-go, you can wall jump and gun glide, which actually gives you a nice amount of spaceship to explore once things go pear-shaped, as they always do in a sci-fi setting. There are some quirks about this game that could be divisive, like its reliance on insta-kill traps and its lives system, but it's easy to rack them up just by collecting these coin-like bits, as well as full one-ups littered all across the ship. Even with a few deaths in my revisit to the game, I still had around 20 lives at the half-hour mark, so maybe it's not perfect, but it's pretty damn fun, and it's literally one single US dollar. WayForward is not just known for the Shantae games, but for being one of the few developers of the 2000s and 2010s to actually put effort into movie licenses. I can't think of a single person who holds the Tom Cruise mummy fondly, although I'll always smile at Tom's inside voice trailer scream. But I can think of a single person who holds the Mummy Demastered fondly, and it's me! Similar to Axiom Verge, this is a weapons-heavy Metroid-style adventure that gets almost everything right. The Contra shooting feels great, which makes sense since several members of the dev team worked on Contra 4, but the direction lead also once created Mighty Switch Force, so the map design is excellent. There's a nice drip feed of frequent upgrade rooms and save spots, and the pixel art is some of WayForward's best. You just have to get over a pretty big hurdle on this one. Whenever you die in the Mummy Demastered, your corpse reanimates with all your upgrades on hand, and you then control a new agent who has to take them down to get your gear back. There's no way around it. This creates an increasingly widening power gap that can get pretty frustrating, so try not to die too often? Sitting somewhere in between the technical platforming of Guacamelee and the exploration of Hollow Knight is the deceptively cute lone fungus. You play the last living member of your kind, but you have a chance to undo that if you so wish. There are multiple endings to this one. This is one of those games where your map won't update until you reach a save point, so if you hated or loved that in Hollow Knight, you'll probably hate or love it here. Hey, why such extreme emotions all the time? It's not healthy. Just one gamer looking out for another. While there are spikes aplenty in Lone Fungus, your sword is able to bounce you off of them harmlessly, saving us from another Kaizo experience. There are these boost pads all over that you eventually activate, and you also get to create your own as well. So combine that all together, and you'll see how demanding the game is gonna get. You can heal your pips based on your available mana, but it does make you quite vulnerable in boss encounters, so time it wisely. The bad and good news on this one is that a sequel was not able to get funded on Kickstarter, but the developer is still plugging away at the game and hopes to have it out by the end of 2025 or early 2026. Perhaps you don't want to think about it too hard, and you just want a fun, uncontroversial game that gets the job done. Kingdom Shell is one such game, which won't sit in the top 10 of games featured here, but is perfectly competent, cromulent, continent, whatever you need. You play as a half-human prisoner given freedom on the condition of hunting down your demon brother who is currently mucking up the world. What I like especially about Kingdom Shell is its amount of collectibles, from health upgrades that you win after completing Celeste-style challenges, to inspirations you equip for perks like Hollow Knight. And I love any game that lets you teleport between save points. It's the ultimate convenience. Kyle Thompson has made a name for himself as a Metroidvania designer, starting with Sheepo and recently giving us Crypt Custodian, so naturally I won't talk about either and instead talk about the middle kid since I was the middle kid myself. Islets has a world of 5 discrete islands that used to be joined together until the core engines went into disrepair. Now you, a lowly adventurer in a tiny airship, will run around each of the islands trying to get those engines back on. Similar to Ghost Song, you have a melee and ranged option, one of which helps to recharge the other. And on top of the usual movement and weapon upgrades, you can also upgrade your airship, which will help you reach more islands. As you activate each region, you'll be able to join them together and create some new routes. That isn't always successful, but it is an interesting gimmick to help separate islets from the rest of the pack. It may come from the bowels of Ubisoft, but I have to give credit where credit is due. The Lost Crown is a bona fide slapper. That extra AAA budget means a great-looking game that scales well to multiple platforms, even the Xbox One X that I played it on. But also, those additional resources mean better variety in biomes and enemy types. But you'll want to bring your A game for the platforming in this one because there are several sequences that will really test you. Yes, the hype was warranted, and Ubisoft naturally responded to the success by shuffling the development team onto less interesting bullshit. Although any Shantae game could make this list, my personal favorite has to be the Pirate's Curse. The others have some weird design decisions, and Half Genie Hero isn't even really a Metroidvania, but Pirate's Curse has everything I enjoy about the series. Great music, fun abilities, quirky characters, and probably the best level design of all 5 games, albeit in the form of several islands you travel between. Plenty of fun little set pieces as well, like carrying Ronnie Tops around or having to stealth around in a palace. And the best version of Burning Town by far, Jake Kaufman absolutely killed it on that tune. How about one that's just really cute? Transaruby comes from longtime Switch developer Skipmore, whose 2017 game Kamiko was kind of the only good indie game on the Switch around its launch. Kinda hard to believe considering the Switch became such an indie magnet. Granted, the eShop now is like the Library of Alexandria for AI slop and hentai, but let's get back to Sarubi, yeah, that's the protagonist's name, as she crash lands on something that fell out of a black hole and lost all her abilities Samus style. The combat is fairly simple, usually just a couple of slashes will get you energy for your freeze gun, which you can then use to create platforms out of enemies, or you can slash frozen enemies for a chance to get a health drop. Not that the game's particularly difficult, even the bosses are pretty chill, but the option's there if you need it. Even though the map is just a square grid, I like that they mark where every data chip is so you don't have to worry about missing anything, because you'll definitely need all those chips in order to open doors, and sometimes that will involve finding hidden paths. Transaruby is just a really pleasant, vibrant, nice little game, even if it is very linear in design with those chip gates. Here's Otto, a more minimalistic feudal tale about a not actually that lone swordsman who has to rescue his kid after they get stolen away. That grimness is contrasted by strikingly vibrant landscapes. Combined with simplified UI elements, you get a mix of melancholy and serenity. The movement and combat are surprisingly up-tempo, with plenty of boss fights that are all about reading your opponent and timing your attacks. There are also some Smash Bros-esque Smash the Targets challenges, and time trial rooms that can award you a piece of heart. So even though this is a smaller game, just around 3 hours in length, there's still a decent amount of things to do. So before I continue with the list, I just want to do a quick plug for my Patreon. I can only do these videos because of your support, so if you'd like to give a buck or two, I'd really appreciate it. If you don't like a subscription model, I also have some old cartoons you can buy if you just want a one-time deal. You don't even have to watch them. Everyone wins! Puzzle games actually can mesh very well with Metroidvania concepts. We have the awkwardly titled Metroidvania subgenre for games like Outer Worlds and Leap Year. Hey, can we please have a better title for those? Call them rule boxes or info hunters, I don't know. But you probably wouldn't expect the box-pushing Sokoban puzzle to work as a Metroidvania. That is, until the Isles of Sea and Sky came about. Or if you've ever played non-linear box pushers in the past, like Full Bore, but that'll surely wait for another video. Each island in Isles of Sea and Sky is full of puzzles in all directions, and as you please the island gods, you'll activate a new puzzle concept, which of course will unlock all new puzzles to solve in past locations. Much like Mario 64, you collect stars, which you can use to reach more islands, but there are other collectibles as well, including some pretty devious secrets, some of which just got added to the game in a free post-release update. I already ranked the game in my top 10 last year, and it's looking like it's getting better and better. I have a soft spot for a pair of platformers that embrace the Metroidvania spirit while still feeling like an old-school European puzzle game, the kind where every room has its own name. Always Awakening gives you a wand with elemental spells that are used primarily for solving platforming puzzles over combat. That does mean the combat's pretty weak, but it's a fair trade-off for what the game is focused on. When it comes to replicating the look of the NES in a widescreen aspect ratio, Shovel Knight is certainly number 1, but Always Awakening has gotta be number 2. Just a great use of restricted color palettes and how to do more with less, but the visuals in its sequel, Always Legacy, are on just another level entirely. Now in the 16-bit era, Legacy's pixel art is among the best in the entire genre. It shifts away from room-by-room puzzles to a more conventional Metroidvania map, but it's still plenty puzzly, and just about every aspect of the first game is bigger and better here. Off the very beaten path is an insanely specific puzzle type of Metroidvania that will really only cater to a very select group of people. 1000 Amps takes the concept of an invisible labyrinth and makes a whole-ass world out of it. In each room, you'll be looking for light nodes, and if you manage to activate all of them, the entire room will light up and reveal itself permanently. And yes, there are ability upgrades for navigation, like a teleport that can warp you to a safe location, though it will erase the tiles around you, so the puzzling continues. Maybe the biggest flaw of the game, besides its lack of controller support and demonic use of the up arrow for a jump, is that it's so old I don't think it will work on modern systems anymore. Weirdly works fine on the Steam Deck though. And the winner of the biggest use of programmer art award goes to Lingo 2. But here's the thing.
You big blowhard, it's my turn.
And here's the thing about Lingo 2, it fucking rules. The original Lingo and former Biggest Use of Programmer Art Award winner was about solving word puzzles in a labyrinthian world by figuring out how the rules of each text box worked. And Lingo 2 manages to reconceptualize itself with new puzzle rules while still feeling just as clever as the original. But the really interesting aspect is that you start off with just one letter. That's right, this is a lettervania, where the amount of words you can type are limited to how many letters you have in your inventory. Designer Brenton Wiles smartly cordons off regions with answers you won't be able to type so that you aren't overwhelmed with the amount of puzzles available to you and all their different rules. And though there's still some antechamber-esque teleportation and disorientation, it's been significantly reduced in the sequel, now serving the role of making you feel like you can reach places you shouldn't be able to yet. I love the Lingo games, and I'm hoping that soon you will too. The next pair of games are really only for the anime perverts out there, because I gotta be honest, the average gamer is probably gonna be uncomfortable with the character designs and the visual novel illustrations. Rabby Ribby in particular really needs to give its character some more clothing. That fairy could at least use a novelty Hot Topic shirt if she's gonna be flying around. For the freaks who don't mind, the game itself is actually pretty great. Tons of secret paths and upgrades to find, and every boss is a bullet hell exhibition with multiple phases and a super attack. Badges you can equip, weapons that gain new abilities the more you use them, also a surprising amount of options to customize the experience, including completely different boss scaling mechanics. The other anime-heavy game is one whose illustrations border on fetishistic, and yet it also comes from Inti Creates, the developers of Mega Man Zero and the Bloodstained spin-off Curse of the Moon. Gao Guardians Servants of the Dark has a highly peculiar form of ability gating. Rather than find abilities through exploration, they're unlocked in a collectathon style like Mario 64. You find the bones of your dead master in the world, and then bring them back to the throne room to not only increase your stats, but also get those new abilities. So you still get plenty of that exploration that you crave in a Metroidvania, but this comes with drawbacks. One of the largest being that bones can drop from enemies, which results in some tedious farming. As you save various servants at the castle, they'll return home to offer various services and shops, and of course I love this aspect much like Suikoden or Dark Cloud, I'm all about it. As for certain bosses, well, you're either gonna roll your eyes or start commissioning fan art of them. Aside from that, the game is highly polished, looks good, and has a nice sized world to explore. But while we're on the subject of games with switchable characters, sometimes you want to play as Charlotte, sometimes you want to play as Jonathan, sometimes you want to play as Charlotte, sometimes you want to play as Jonathan.
Jonathan! Charlotte! Jonathan! Charlotte! Jonathan! Charlotte!
What was I saying? Oh, right, these games let you play as multiple characters. Way back in the day, I really disliked the game Unepic. I thought it was not very funny and kind of a slog to play. But over time, that developer has really grown in leaps and bounds, from Ghost 1.0 to stealth parody on Metal, and Pompous and Celine might be their best game yet. It definitely has its roots in games like Maze of Gallius or Sega's Zillion. It's a single-screen room-by-room platformer with two protagonists that each have their own abilities and weapons, like being able to survive longer underwater or boots that let you rise on updrafts. Pompous and Celine just has good vibes, and it's one of the few Metroidvanias that has local and online co-op play. Maybe 2 characters isn't enough for you. How about 3? Too incremental? Well, how about 5? Astalon Tears of the Earth brings 3 adventurers into a cursed tower, looking to defeat the Dark Knight who's poisoned their village. Unfortunately for them, he kills them. So the next game on the list, oh wait, there's more written down here. One of the 3 made a demonic pact to protect them until they finish the job, so they'll be dying and dying and dying until they save the world. As I mentioned, you do get 2 additional teammates, each with new abilities, and of course future upgrades and improvements, some of which are selected after a death in this afterlife menu. Astalon barely skirts by my standard for what makes a Metroidvania, since you do gain those new members later, but I'm glad for that because it's a high quality one. It's up-tempo, has great exploration, and various secrets to poke around for, kinda like a super souped up Legacy of the Wizard. How about some inner space action? Well, maybe inner space and outer space? Because yeah, Moonlight Pulse takes place inside of a living body, but that body is the size of a galaxy and devours planets. Does that count as Vor? Is Galactus just a massive fetishist? You play the role of a curative agent, tasked with destroying all the parasites that are harming the host body, which might be the result of a cosmic entity distorting space and time. Each character you gain has their own useful tools and can each equip a badge, some of which are tailored specifically for them. There are a couple of quirks that may put some people off, like the transport tubes that are often one way and blocked in several areas until you can remove the enemies leeching it. And there's no fast travel, so you'll be hoofing it everywhere. But it's still quite a unique take from a developer who you will see on this list again later. While Double Fine is primarily known for Psychonauts and a somewhat spotty track record otherwise, I really have to give it up to Headlander, a wildly clever take on the genre from Lee Petty, who also gave us stacking. You play as a head, just literally a head, that can attach themselves to any body they want. Yeah, you can even be a dog briefly. Different robot bodies have different security signatures, which will allow you more and deeper access around the spaceship, which has a 70s retro future look that I absolutely adore. So how do you handle ability gating with different bodies? Well, the head itself gets the abilities, like a vacuum sucker to pop heads off or a shield to reflect lasers and projectiles. You might not like everything Double Fine makes, but I hope Headlander doesn't get forgotten. While we're talking oldies, I want to talk about Magicians and Looters. It's an ugly duckling to be sure, but back in 2014, I remembered really liking it, so I recently gave it a spin again, and I kinda get why I was enamored. It was really the only Symphony of the Night inspired indie game around, with lots of equipment to find and a unique leveling system that involves finding hidden orbs. Each level up confers a bonus to all three of the playable characters, so it really rewards thorough exploration for those orbs. And each character gets their own useful abilities, on top of spells you'll need to unlock gates. Also, it's actually kind of funny, maybe a bit too zany and self-aware at times, but it still caught me off guard on occasion. The only problem for me personally is the dang thing won't run on the Steam Deck, but it still works on modern Windows computers, so if you somehow exhaust everything else on this list and you get that itch still, you might find something to like in Magicians and Looters. There's really no genre the Metroidvania won't infect. Even pinball isn't safe from its tendrils, so you better get used to it. Metroidvania board games, Metroidvania 4X, Metroidvania worms, Metroidvania spreadsheets, and soon, Metroidvania the world! Anyway, back to pinball. Yoku's Island Express is the coziest game in this entire selection, with a gentle tropical aesthetic and not a whole lot of danger. Even falling between the flippers will usually just cost you a couple of fruit, the currency of the game that can be used to unlock various bumpers around the world. The pinball physics are generous to the player as you play a dung beetle tethered to the ball who can help put a little English on it. The upgrades are also a bit unconventional, like an ability to suck in slugs and use them as explosives. And fruit is plentiful, you'll always be given more than you need, which of course is why you'll also find wallet upgrades in the world as well. And you get to play Postman, delivering packages to NPCs as well as letters to all sorts of mailboxes. It's just a super delightful game. Perhaps Mini-Shoot Adventures leans more on the Zelda side of things, but there's already so little that separates Zelda gameplay from Metroid gameplay that I don't think anyone would complain about me including it here. You play as a sentient spaceship who has been freed from a crystal in order to save all of their similarly trapped spaceship friends, but between you and them lies hundreds of enemies and thousands of bullets. Mini-Shoot is a bullet-hell twin-stick shooter, but a fair one that won't have you pulling your hair out, and that's partially due to its extremely crisp art direction that focuses on readability and conveyance first. You want a map with a completion percentage in the multiple decimals? This game's got one. And like classic Zelda games, there are all sorts of caves and dungeons to enter and secret paths to find. Also, let's give credit to a game for having a skill tree whose upgrades are actually major power boosts instead of, I don't know, plus 1% fire element when using a spear against insect enemies. You probably wouldn't expect to see a straight-up turn-based JRPG on this list, but that's only if you've never heard of Crystal Project. It's a large-scale, semi-non-linear game set in a fictional MMO, but don't let that scare you away. This isn't Sword Art Online or whatever. It's actually closer in spirit to Final Fantasy V or Bravely Default, with a bunch of job classes you can acquire either behind powerful bosses or just hiding in the open world. The battle system also gives you every single statistic you need to know, including what the enemy plans to do and how well your given strategy will work, so you never have to worry about random bullshit wiping your party. The reason Crystal Project is on this list is because several regions of the game can't be reached, and so you acquire several mounts that each have their own abilities, like swimming, high jumping, and flying, though I'm sure several players have figured out how to sequence break at this point. This was my game of the year in 2022, and I'll always recommend it to anyone who hears the word JRPG and doesn't immediately launch into a diatribe about how Expedition 33 ended the need for them. Look, I know that game is great, but some people are really having some guy who's only seen Boss Baby energy in the discourse. Sometimes you just want to be let loose in a big world and go in whatever direction looks interesting. Well, Superland puts you in a tiny world, but you're tiny too, so it works out. It's a first-person platformer full of all sorts of upgrades, from the usual ability add-ons to stat buffs to passive perks, and just about every nook and cranny has something useful behind it if you're able to reach them. The combat is nothing special, but just about every other aspect of this game is polished to a high sheen, from its puzzle variety to its world design. Any progress you make in the demo will transfer over to the full game, so you really have no excuse not to try it. Just don't rush out to play the DLC or the follow-up 6 Inches Under. They really don't recapture the magic in my opinion. Maybe you just want the Metroid experience boiled down to its most abstract elements. Well, how about Metroid Worlds, a Metroidvania located entirely within the iconic square grid map? Okay, this is a very short experience, around an hour in length with some extra stuff, so don't really expect that much, but I found it to be a cute little diversion, and it's only $3. Consider it a throw-in if it's on sale. Despite the genre name, plenty of other developers had similar concepts in games of the 80s and 90s. Take Power Slave, for example, an Egyptian-themed first-person shooter from 1996 that Lobotomy Software developed for the Sega Saturn and PS1. While the MS-DOS version was your typical Doom-style shooter, the console version put in full non-linear gameplay and ability-gated regions. For a long time, the only way to play this game was via a fan-made engine, but Night Dive brought that coder in and put out a full-fledged remaster of the game in 2022, combining all of the best aspects of each version into a sort of shooter chimera. Aesthetically, there are still not that many shooters out there with this kind of look outside of some parts of the Serious Sam franchise. A couple of abilities are a little clunky to wield, but on the whole, I think this experiment to fuse genres really works well, and Night Dive's remaster in particular is one of their best. There are some Metroidvanias that deserve more love, either because they sold very poorly or just have review scores I don't really agree with, because it's not an indie game list without hot takes to yell at and games with fewer than 100 reviews. Of all of the games in this video, After Death is by far the one with the strongest individual vision. You play as a newly dead shamble of bones whose soul is barely clinging to life, and you're gonna find a way out of this hellhole one punch at a time. Many games will style bite one way or the other, but After Death is willing to go its own way, with its own unique powers and strange art style. How many Metroidvanias replace the morph ball with a spider, or make a biome out of a sunken ship? It's admittedly got a little more jank to it, but hey, you're a skeleton that can make flames explode around you. There's a couple of 4-color games that run in similar circles, Haiku the Robot and Kunai. Personally, I wasn't as huge on Haiku as others, and I also think it's been spoken about enough, so time to break out another spicy take that only 12 people will care about. I really like Kunai a lot. You play as a tablet computer awoken in the midst of a robot apocalypse, and the titular Kunai are Bionic Commando-style diagonal grapple hooks. Yeah, maybe the combat could be better, but traversing around is just so damn fun, quickly zooping up vertical shafts and slash bouncing off of heads as you zip from room to room, and some regions have multiple routes to the destination, along with, of course, pieces of heart. You have to have pieces of heart. The bosses range from pretty difficult to, well, a single shove out a window. That section's also a tribute to the auto-scrolling airship levels of Super Mario Bros. 3, a cool little change of pace. Hopefully someone in the comments will also echo my appreciation of this arcadey romp. Vision's soft reset definitely leans on the sci-fi alien blasting, but its most defining feature is its time travel mechanics. Faced with dying in a planet-wide eruption, you hop back and forth between newly created timelines in order to stop it. Every time you make a critical decision or gain a new ability, the timeline will split and provide a new point to return to. This means you get all of the best aspects of time loop games and Outer Wilds and a conventional Metroid, since you'll lose abilities when you rewind time, but not crucial information, which helps you bypass puzzles, find shortcuts, and keep tabs on NPC schedules. Vision comes from the same developer as Moonlight Pulse, and I actually like Vision more. It is the rare game to attempt something highly ambitious and actually pull it off through modest means. Aside from Lingo 2, this might be the wonkiest looking game in the video, but I assure you, Super Panda Adventures is fun. Think Commander Keen if it had ability gating and backtracking, but with tighter controls and lots of content. Shops and quests and RPG stats and hidden secrets, and combat that lets you attack super quickly like a modern Ys game, which I always love because I'm a button masher. You just have to get over the fact that it looks like an MS-DOS game stretched to a widescreen resolution. If you fancy a flashback to the end of the Xbox Live Arcade era, or you just have a thing for that 2000s furry webcomic look, you might really enjoy Dust and Elysian Tale. Knock the art style all you want though, that animation is fantastic and as fluid as the combat itself, a mix of beat 'em up melee and ranged where you can twirl your sword like a fan to send those projectiles all over the screen, just boogering around. I also like leveling up because upgrading one of your stats brings a significant boost. The map, I will say, is not great. I always think it's weird when people try to reinvent the wheel, and this particular wheel should be reinvented if you catch my drift. Not that I necessarily love the Hollow Knight style of showing the entire topography of every room, but simple single squares don't really get it done. This one's for the sickos, a 2015 game running in a tiny window that defaults to mouse and keyboard until you go into the settings. But peel back the crust and savor the flavor of even more crust. You remember the I wanna be the guy craze? Well, Castle in the Darkness isn't quite as Kaizo as some of the most devious Mario ROM hacks, but it's pretty freaking hard. Enemies in the beginning do a ton of damage to you, and there's a lot of trolling baked into the design. Look, the sign warned you not to jump into the pipe, you have only yourself to blame. Yeah, that's a 5-digit death counter, what of it? There's no map, there's no autosave, there's no edge forgiveness, and insta-kill spikes everywhere. So why do I recommend Castle in the Darkness? Well, first of all, because I know some people really relish a challenge, and for them, throwing their controller is part of the fun. Second, the developer of this game would then go on to make another, much more beloved Metroidvania classic, Astalon Tears of the Earth. So while this is less polished and its humor a little too referential and eye-rolling, you can see the early design chops at work here. Another one that I don't really get the hate for is Cathedral. Just about all the recommended reviews are negative despite a 79% overall user score. And look, I get it, the upgrade feed starts to run dry too early, the later parts of the game get really hard, but as an attempt to make a Metroidvania out of Shovel Knight, I think it works pretty well. Great music, if a bit short on the loops, enemies exploding with cash which you can bring back to shops and buy passive perks and beef yourself up, a helpful spirit friend you can send out to hit hard to reach switches, and nice big biomes to explore. Took me over 15 hours to finish the game. Maybe it's a B- rather than a B+, but I still think if you can find Cathedral on sale, it's worth the time. Lastly in this section, I'll talk about one that's probably the most flawed, but I think is still worth a gander for its premise and pleasant art design. In Super Epic, you play as a rebel riding an alpaca who has come to disrupt and topple a free-to-play game empire that has a stranglehold on the populace. The combat is just okay, but I do like that you have different weapons assigned to 3 of the face buttons, and you can really juggle enemies in the air for as long as you want. The checkpoints are a little too few and far between, although you do at least get an additional life, if you're willing to fork over half your money Dragon Quest style. That money can be spent buying new weapons as well as upgrading them and your health bar. But there is sort of a time limit on this game because there are rooms that are locked with QR codes, and something tells me that website is not going to be around for a super long time. But I don't know, I think this one's pretty charming. If you don't vibe with it though, you might like the developer's time loop platformer Treasures of the Aegean more. It's not a Metroidvania, but it's highly underrated in my opinion. At this point, some of you are probably 500 words into your essay rebuttal about how your favorite game got snubbed. Well, keep this in mind. I still have many to play, many on my wish list, and also, I'm planning on doing a volume 2 in the future. Plus, there are some that I just don't personally vibe with, and at the end of the day, it's my list. But I'd love to do this kind of recommendation video for more genres on Steam, like point-and-click adventures, JRPGs, investigation games, and hey, how about non-Metroidvania platformers? If any of that sounds interesting to you, leave a comment below, and be sure to tell me about your favorite Metroidvanias as well. I promise not to be a nerd and claim it doesn't count. Maybe. Thanks for watching this video. I've got a lot of reviews of indie games and anime on here, and some really old cartoons if you turn the dial all the way back. I also stream on Twitch, and I have some chiptune albums at savestates.bandcamp.com. Anyone who subscribes to my Patreon gets videos early, as well as bonus stuff, and of course a name drop in the credits. A special shout out to my indie darlings, Tyler McBride, Game Trekker, Rob Ska, Thumpus, and Tony Domenico. And a bonus thanks to channel member Glornch. Your support means everything. Until next time, you'll find me in another castle.